Welcome to Asian Times TV. We have with us Vicki Hansen, the Vice Chair of the International Democrats Abroad group, which has chapters in 52 countries, as Ken just told us, and trying to get out the vote and making a full effort to re-elect the President, Barack Obama, in 2012. Vicki's going to enlighten us on how the organization is doing this time around.
Okay, thanks very much. I think one thing that we're organized on the ground in 52 countries, and we actually, though, have members in 160 countries. And as Ken was saying, it's very much the election season that mobilizes our members. And we know how important that is when we think back to 2010, how that perhaps in 2010, we would have liked to have seen more mobilization, because it was a real shame to have lost the House.
At the local level, you mean?
At the congressional
level, yeah.
At the congressional level, absolutely.
Right.
So this time around, 2012, we really want to push the message that everyone needs to just vote a straight Democratic ticket, up and down. There are very tight races. I was talking to one individual delegate from Colorado, and he was explaining in his congressional district, it can be just 23 votes that makes a difference to whether you have a Tea Party representative.
So what would you tell the people who are still kind of, apparently 2 or 3% are still undecided or on the fence, who are going to make the difference?
Well, I think Bill Clinton told us last night, really, what he told us, look at the math. Make sure the math stacks up. And he gave us some fantastic examples. He has a good track record on the jobs front. And he has made the point also that no president, with what we were facing as the worst thing since the Depression, no president would have been able to just totally turn this country around in 4 years. It was an impossible task to do it totally. And that what was done was excellent, that we're on the upswing, and that it will continue to grow, which is fantastic. And that there's plans in place that we will be seeing from our president that will actually allow us to achieve that. And that the math on the Democratic plans actually adds up. And that if we look at the Republican plans, that the math doesn't add up to growth.
So from the international global perspective, right, President still remains very popular. Absolutely. On the order of 60-70% approval rating in countries like France, Germany, Italy, where his bailout plan, the stimulus bailout plan, and other initiatives that he's made on the economy to keep the euro stable, if you will, and the eurozone overall stable, he gets high marks. So what would you tell Americans here, in terms of how the world sees the efforts this president is making?
I think this economic problem has been worldwide, and everyone understands the difficulty with the economy. Where we really notice our president is with regards to his diplomatic approach and his to foreign relations, and his approach as well, where he is trying to be in the same way as here at home, abroad as well. He tries to be inclusive in his approach, I believe. And America is still strong. America is still seen as a leader. America is still seen as the most hopeful place, with an incredible spirit of Thanksgiving and all the things that make us great. I think many of us as Americans who live abroad, we kind of feel like we're almost old-fashioned Americans. I know I personally feel like I'm an old-fashioned American. I'm an American who respects diversity. A little bit like the Irish sometimes in New York are thought to be more Irish than the Irish in Ireland. Right. I'm told by my Danish friends in Europe that I'm almost well, I'm certainly I'm almost more American than some of my patriots here.
But you're not saying
also,
you're not an antiquated American. You're not saying
absolutely not. I kind of one from the Peace Corps days, perhaps.
Right.
One in the believer of
right.
Let's reach out. Let's lift all of us. Come together. We all come together, and through togetherness, we'll come up.
Now, some economists have argued that Canada, because it didn't have kind of the same scale of banking crisis and housing crisis, with 3% or 3.5% unemployment rate, and rich oil and mineral reserves, is doing far better than the United States now.
That's true, but the unemployment in Canada's creeped over 7%, and the global impact that you've seen in Europe is now affecting the Canadian economy.
Not certainly in the
Not
British
like
Columbia
Greece
and or
Spain
Calgary.
at the moment. I think in terms of this election, Americans abroad have a very different perspective, and I try not to share our point of view as if it's going to motivate a voter in, let's say, Missouri. The U.S. citizenry is not one that basically thinks globally. They're looking at the pocketbook issues, and that's what's going to drive this election. And I think what's important to say is we need the U.S. voter to look forward. I mean, right now, the economy is impacting very negatively, so voters are not particular. They're looking for simple solutions, immediate solutions. And I think what I'm hearing through this convention, the speeches that have come forward, and what I expect from the President to say this evening, is we need to look forward. Let's look at the alternatives. Are we going to go back to the old trickle-down economics of the Bush administration now being enunciated through the Tea Party and through the Romney campaign, or we're going to look forward? We have to look that, we have about 4.2 million new jobs in the private sector that have been added in the last 3 years by this president. We now have a health plan that is going to bring maybe 50–60% of those who don't have health insurance into a system that will bring health care, prescription drugs, mammograms, things that people were cut out from, bringing students into automatically under the age of 26 into coverage. It will change the whole
So to those who say Canada has a rationed healthcare system and you have to wait to get simple procedures done, what do you say to them?
The difficulty in Canada, I mean, I have to go under an operation for polyps.
I see.
And I'm in one of those wait lines. But I tell you, the treatment that I've gotten, there's no cost for any of my examinations, CAT scans, it's all built into the system. It's a matter, I mean, I could spend a couple $1,000, come back here to the United States to get, but it's not an emergency situation. In an emergency situation, the Canadian healthcare system works. Americans who live in Canada who want to come back into the United States think 3 times or 4 times about whether they're going to come back and be absorbed by this healthcare system that they have presently in the States. Americans in Canada are in exile when it comes to thinking about coming back in the United States to take on the healthcare.
So what do you say about MS? Like this whole, we've heard a lot about
My wife
MS.
has MS.
No, I know. That's what I was asking you because both the candidates talked about their family narrative, impacted by MS. Michelle Obama's father and Ann Romney herself talked about her own battle with MS. And
Well, my wife has MS
Right.
in the system. I mean, to one point where she was absorbing interferon was costing $1,700 a month, and just everyday inoculation with interfering. The government picked up every part of that cost, excepting for $4 that you had to pay at the pharmacy for picking up your drugs. The Canadian system is I guess you might call it a Medicare for all system. I'd love to see, I've seen that in the U.S. legislation. We're not there yet, but if the system that Barack Obama set up, it will lead eventually, we believe, to Medicare for all.
Okay, fantastic.
I'm born and bred in Des Moines, Iowa, but I live in Luxembourg. And one thing Barack Obama did was we got Luxembourg off the gray list, which is good, because a lot of people don't realize Luxembourg is actually the home of the European Parliament. It was the beginning, it has the largest steel company in the world in it, and it also has a huge satellite company. It does do fund management and things like that, but it's not it's part of the European community. And I went to Luxembourg 15 years ago when my spouse had taken work with the European Parliament. I then went on to have 2 children who've been raised there, and I never thought I was going to live someplace smaller than Des Moines, Iowa, I must admit. But while I was there, my youngest son, he had some hearing difficulties, so I took him into our nationalized medicine in Luxembourg, and they gave him a hearing test, and they explained to me, they gave a diagnosis. When I was back that summer visiting my family in Iowa, I thought, okay, I'm just going to get him double-checked here, because maybe, you know, the medicine is better in the U.S. and they might have other solutions for him. And we paid a $100 doctor referral fee. I then went in to a specialist to have his ears tested, and then I got my diagnosis. What I found was they used the exact same machine, the same brand and everything. The diagnosis was absolutely the same. They were a little bit more pro going for surgery than not. They didn't talk about so much other alternatives, but the diagnosis was basically the same. And the only difference is that in Luxembourg, I paid $50 for this, and you can add a 0 for what I paid out of the U.S. So I think for me, and when that caused me to start to look into it.
So 50 versus 500 or 5,000? What is it?
No, 50 versus 500.
Just for the diagnosis,
yeah,
not the treatment.
The test of going into a special hearing booth,
right.
Having a test and about a 20-minute consultation.
Got it.
And afterwards I looked into it, and it does seem that, you know, a lot of the cost is to do with marketing, and it's to do with the fact that you don't get the discounts of a single-payer system. Now this would be a huge step for America. I realize that because we're founded on principles of business. You know, we heard during the convention, we had a fantastic speech by the CEO of Costco. Something like that really resonates with me, a girl from Iowa, I must admit. The idea that you're offering a service and building something. So I understand that fundamentally this is the way we want to be. But when it comes to something like healthcare, I do believe, personally, I think we have to care. We have to care enough to ensure that everyone has access to good basic health care, and we have a system that promotes preventative health care that's built around trying to keep people healthy and not profiting off of people being ill.
Yeah, I think the last interview that I did with you used a tagline that in Luxembourg everybody has universal health care and they drive a Lexus.
Yeah.
So explain that.
Luxembourg, like I said, a lot of people think when they hear you're from Luxembourg, it's a little bit discriminatory. They always think, oh, there's someone who's very wealthy or something like that. It's not the case here particularly. I'm a university teacher there, and we had a former U.S. ambassador who made a comment about Luxembourg that was a little disagreeable to the Luxembourgians, indicating that anyway, with regards to this, I just like to point out Luxembourg, did at one stage have one of the highest standards of living in the world per capita. And I like to point out that yes, our doctors, yes, we do have socialized medicine, if you like, nationalized medicine, single-payer system, but our doctors still drive Porsches. And a lot of them drive Lexus and green cars too, and Priuses. And
right.
really neat little BMWs that
Right.
kind of turn off when you are
Right.
stopped at a green light.
Right. Hybrids, yeah. Well, it's a beautiful city. I love Luxembourg.
The other thing we often say is Luxembourg looks a little bit like Walt Disneyland, but it's real.
That's right. Fantastic. Definitely something out of the fairy tales. All right. So we want to end by talking about,
There's one message.
the other
thing
initiative, yeah.
If I may give.
Sure.
And that is that every election year, anyone who is Americans who are living abroad, working abroad, studying abroad, serving abroad, you must request your ballot every election year. And there's a very simple way to do that by going to the website www.votefromabroad.org.
So what is the total number now? Is it 8 million or 9 million expats who are overseas?
No, we don't have an exact number, but we think it's up to 6 million.
Including men and women who are serving?
About 1 million of that could be the service.
I see.
Vote from abroad, we really focus on the civilian
Right.
people, and we're just the grassroots people out there getting out the vote.
An overwhelming number of that are really Democrats, right?
We believe so.
As based on an estimate, right? Because the Republicans, you said, are not as well organized, I think is what I understood.
No, it's not. The Republicans are organized differently. In Democrats Abroad, in the Democratic Party, we are very honored to be part of the Association of State Democratic Chairs. And we're very honored to be the official part of the political party representing Americans who live outside of the United States. So we have to follow all the FEC laws and all the requirements of a political party. The Republicans don't do that. They have a pact, and it's more focused on fundraising. We're more of a grassroots, get out the vote organization. We also lobby. We do congressional door knocks on different items that are affecting those Americans who are living outside of the U.S.
And so you have somebody who represents you in Washington, D.C.?
No, we certainly have friends on the Hill, that's
Right.
for sure. There's a lot of people on the Hill who recognize the importance that we Americans who are living abroad, if you like, we can be ambassadors, all of us. We can be ambassadors for our country, and we can be helping, to increase exports from our country and things like that. I know when I get off the airplane in Des Moines, Iowa, there are a lot of global messages. Companies in Iowa are proud to have, to be worldwide organizations, actually.
Last evening in the vote, the Democrats abroad had 19 votes to cast in the party's nomination.
You mean electoral votes?
No, 19 votes out of the 2,700
I see.
convention votes.
I see.
About 0.8%.
Right.
The party's representation comes from Americans abroad.
Right.
We sort of speak for those 4 to 6 million
Right.
outside of the United States.
Right.
We cast those votes, but unlike what we call six extra state organizations like Samoa and Guam and the Virgin Islands, even the District of Columbia, our members vote in those 50 states. And so in a way, those congressmen and senators represent us. So if we are unified and carrying a message as we are on tax issues, on voting issues, on health issues, on family issues, immigration issues, we try to speak for our members through the Congress as we lobby and vote. And the issue for us right now is a big issue. We have taxation. Every American anywhere in the world must pay taxes. Unlike any other country in the world where they are taxed on residency, we are taxed on citizenship. So if we have to pay taxes, we should think very clearly about our representation. Taxation with representation. And that's why it's so important to mobilize and speak to our members about the presidency, the Congress, and the Senate.
So the FATCA law, which I think is in the Congress, right, or has been voted on, but hasn't been implemented yet, which is yet another tax that banks would have to pay potentially. Okay.
Penalty rather than the tax.
Okay, penalty on banks who hold accounts with Americans, right? Explain to me, Vicki, you're nodding your head. Explain to me what you think is going on with that FATCA thing, or the FATCA law.
We always talk in terms of FATCA and FBAR, and perhaps we should just explain both of them. And Ken can correct me if I'm wrong here, and you can edit it out.
Okay, sure.
Thanks. So what happened is when we had 9/11 happen, as part of the Homeland Security Act, there were some very tight financial measures that were put in place, understandably, so that they could track money and ensure that there was not terrorism happening, money laundering and terrorism. And as part of that, there were unintended consequences, basically, because it all of a sudden became the requirement that everyone who lived overseas had to report any bank account that had over $10,000 balance on it at any time at all. And then when we had the banking crisis, of course, many people didn't want to have too much money, and if you have your savings, your pension, things like this, you didn't want to have too much in one bank, and so you would move it to more banks to be under the limit there. And it became a very big headache to a lot of people to be able to give the highest level that was in any account over the past 10 years, because that's the requirement. And so what we found is that we had members, 22% or something of our members are actually in education. But you will have teachers and things that were getting very stressed because they want to follow the law, they want to do everything correctly. Banks in Europe, at least in Luxembourg, in Europe, like to give you your end-of-year balance, because that tends to be what you're taxed on in Europe, what you have to report. So they weren't set up well to give this. And so this created a headache, if you like, between the desire of the U.S. government and the systems of the banking systems, where the banking systems could not easily report in a way that allowed American citizens to give the information that they were required to give to the Treasury. And so, and there were huge penalties if you did not comply. So Democrats Abroad had the only representation at a hearing on that was not a banker, basically, where we had our FATCA steering committee actually were represented there and spoke up for ordinary Americans, spoke up for those teachers and people that were just concerned, that they...
Well, but was Luxembourg inordinately, sort of just in the target, because there's a lot of banking that takes place in Luxembourg, European banking?
No, it's nothing to do like that.
Okay.
I honestly, certainly America did not get great press for this because they were viewed as being costly in the way to all of a sudden have an American client as you could be liable.
I think if we trace back to the early 70s, the federal government passed legislation that a lot of Americans weren't even aware of, or tax accountants, that when you file your U.S. 1040, your tax form, you have been required since 1970 to file an additional form called the FBAR. And that is the report to Treasury. Any account that you have, any bank account outside of the United States that you have more than $10,000 into it during the course of the year. And if you did not report, you would be penalized up to $10,000 for the fact that you just not. And most Americans were not even aware of this. And 3 years ago in Canada, they got elevated because of new legislation dealing with FATCA. Now, this threshold of 10,000 is probably hits 90% of any American who lives abroad. And the penalties for paying a fee of $10,000. So we have been working to try to lift that threshold of reporting from 10,000 up to 500,000. Now, when the FACTA legislation that came about because of the Homeland Security and the transfers, it requires, in addition to the FBAR, that you have to make a second report, in this case to Internal Revenue, not to the Treasury, of any account that you have for, if you're a single individual, 200,000. And the accounts are not just in your bank account, it's your stock holdings, it's your life insurance, your ownership of a bond. All of that comes accumulatively, and the penalties are as high as 10,000 for not filing that form. That form, if the banks require also, any bank or any security company outside of the United States, if you're selling stocks and you have U.S. holders of stocks, or any banks, if you're holding a U.S. citizen's account, you have to report, you have the affirmative responsibility to, as UBS or HSBC,
Right.
or the bank account,
Right.
they have the affirmative responsibility of telling Treasury of any U.S. holder.
So partly it was security, but is it also the case that, the offshoring of American treasure and monies and resources is also something that's used, not, clearly corporations do this much more effectively, but are individuals also potentially, a certain bracket of individuals in the U.S. do this?
Who holds an American stockholder interest, they will get penalized up to 30% of what that stockholder might have to be paying in taxes. So all these, the cost to a bank to service what the U.S. government is requiring, it's far easier for these banks or stock brokers to opt out, and they don't want U.S. accounts. So the impact is, that's where people are really...
That's where Luxembourg was, because it's a big banking center.
Right.
They were like, we're going to have to spend a lot of money to comply to these
Right.
laws. And they do, in Europe, they do share information. So they have ways they share already to talk about their account holders and make sure that everyone's paying their tax where they
Right.
should be paying their tax. And this requirement just didn't fit in line with that one.
Yeah, the one impact of the conversations we've been having with IRS and Treasury is that now they've created an amnesty program for American tax filers if they get back in line starting starting September next month, or this month. That there is an open season that the penalties will not be applied if people come into compliance. So we're urging our U.S. taxpayers to come into compliance.
Got it.
The single biggest issue in Canada for not voting is the tax issue. I mean, the U.S. Treasury or IRS will, if you're a voter, will know where to go get you.
For the expats, you mean?
For the
Americans who are living.
American citizens living abroad.
Yeah.
So this is a big issue of suppression, is the tax issue. And the way it's being handled has led to suppression of the vote and the fear of the term limit. But there is no connection between voting and tax.